One of the things that makes me laugh is instructions and signs that don't make sense. So I just for fun, I thought I'd show you a few of my favorites. All right, here we go. Now, if you're directionally challenged, you don't know what's funny about that, but I think that's pretty funny. Look closely at this one. You may be at risk for throat cancer if you have a throat or a mouth, which most of us then would be at risk. Here's another one that I like. Because it was on ground level, I won't explain yet. Now this is Captain Obvious here. Warning, battery has been removed. Would have caught that. Guess you didn't think that was funny. I thought it was. Here you go. This is for day or night use only. So if it's not day or night, don't you dare use this thing. See if you can figure out when you can park. I think it's the middle of the night on Monday you can park. That's it. Except no parking anytime. How about this one? Creates a lot of questions, doesn't it? Or this one. Your tax dollars at work. Finally, this sign on a toilet. Toilet only for disabled, elderly, pregnant children. Which I've never met a disabled, elderly, pregnant child, but you laugh at signs that don't make sense, but you get frustrated when God's instructions don't seem to make sense. See, I've got financial trouble, and I know what the Bible says about putting God's kingdom first. Rod, I've heard you talk about it. It doesn't make sense. How will giving money to God help me? God, do you want me to forgive him? And you forgiving me is tied to me forgiving him? He hadn't even asked for forgiveness. Think of some of the commands of Jesus we struggle with. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. How about this from Paul's writing? In everything give thanks. Rejoice in persecution and hardship. It's better to give than receive. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. Those commands don't seem to make sense. You bring your rational, logical, American mindset into your relationship with God. You want everything to make good, solid, logical sense so you can figure it out. But God doesn't always work that way. So what do you do when God's instructions don't seem to make sense? In response to that question, I want to slow down and look closely at one of the most famous stories in the entire Bible. Let me set it up for you first. After 40 years in the desert, the Israelites crossed the Jordan and entered the Promised Land, but they'd not yet faced any enemies. With the exception of Joshua and Caleb, they didn't have a single soldier who'd ever fought in a battle. It was an entirely new group of guys who had never fought any enemy anywhere. Can you imagine going to battle with all rookies? How frightening would that be? They needed a good, solid plan to defeat their enemies in the Promised Land. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and he saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went to him and asked, "Are you for us or are you for our enemies?" Joshua had over 40,000 men in his army. For perspective, that's the population of Hot Springs. There's no way that Joshua knew every guy. So he looked out, there's this guy standing in front of him with a sword. Joshua asked, "Whose side are you on? Are you one of my guys or are you one of the bad guys? Whose army are you part of?" The man said, "Neither. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I've now come." Most theologians believe this was God himself. That would explain Joshua's reaction. Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence. and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" In fear, reverence, and respect for God, Joshua took a position of humble submission. "Lord, whatever you have to tell me, I'm listening." Joshua was expecting instructions on how to fight. Okay, you're here in the promised land. This is how I want you to arrange the troops. This is the tactic for the battle. I want you to start in this city and then go to this city. That's what Joshua was expecting. Instead, the commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Never forget, I guess I was probably just 9th or 10th grade in a Sunday night service at Calvary Temple in Irving, Texas. There was a message in tongues, and the interpretation came, and the interpretation was, "Take off your shoes, this is holy ground." And everybody kind of looked around, and some people did it, a lot of people didn't, and you could tell people were thinking, this is kind of kooky. So then there was a second message in tongues, and the interpretation was, "I'm not kidding. Take off your shoes. This is holy ground." And we all did. And we took off our shoes. And the next 20 to 25 minutes was one of the most awesome moments in the presence of the Lord I've ever experienced. Why was it holy? The ground Joshua was standing on was the same ground people had walked on for centuries. God was there. And the presence of God is what makes any place holy. See, we can fall in love with places and forget that it's God who makes it holy. So if you're watching online, right there where you are right now can be holy ground because the Lord's there. Remember, when Joshua became the leader, God gave him a promise. Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And now God was honoring that promise. This had to be nervous commander leading an army full of rookies was reminded, God is with me. God is on my side. Now Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out. No one came in. Now, this is where the story of Jericho usually starts. Most people skip those few verses before it. But if you start here, you miss such an important point. Before any battle, you first need to be in the presence of the Lord. Before that conversation with your boss, you need to be in God's presence. Before you walk into school, you need to spend time in the presence of the Lord. Before your next doctor appointment, you need to spend your time on holy ground because that's where God is. Before you interact with your unsaved loved ones or coworkers or classmates, spend time in God's presence. His presence prepares you. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men." And you expect Joshua to say, "What are you talking about, God? I'm not seeing them delivered in my hands. I don't know what you're looking at, God, but I see a walled city tightly shut." Joshua saw a fortified city. God saw a frightened city. And God was saying, look, they fear you because of me. If someone you don't know is outside your house, what do? You shut the windows, you lock the doors, and you pull the curtains closed to send the message, you're not coming in here. That was Jericho. If the people of Jericho wanted to fight, they would have met the Israelites on the battlefield. Instead, they had the windows closed, the gates shut, and the doors locked. Now remember, there might have been as many as 600,000 Israelites, double the amount of people who live in Little Rock, North Little Rock, Sherwood, and Jacksonville. 600,000 people can't sneak up on you. The people of Jericho saw them coming from a long way away, and they hid behind the walls. Jericho was afraid. They had the walls and gates shut tight. They heard that God's army was on the move and God's people were coming. The enemy was frightened because they recognized that God's power was greater than their power. See, we spend too much time on the other side of the equation. We're frightened because we forget that God's power is greater. In this case, Jericho was afraid, and they had good reason. They'd heard about the Jordan River. They probably even knew that God had promised the Israelites their land. And now, Joshua got what he expected from God. God gave Joshua his brilliant battle plan. March around the city once with all of the armed men. Then storm the gates, knock them down, burn their houses, and cut off their heads. Right? That makes sense. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horn in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpet. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have all the people give a loud shout. Then the walls of the city will collapse, and the people will go up, every man straight in. See, because you've heard that story for years, you're like, well, yeah, that's what God says. Joshua had to think, really? I mean, come on, God. You can't really want me to do this. I'm a new commander. All my soldiers are rookies. This is my first big battle. They're ready to fight. And you want me to tell them, we're going to have a week-long parade. God, this isn't going to go well. If you don't know the end of the story, this sounds like the most ridiculous plan ever. But remember, this was a face-to-face encounter with God. Joshua got his instructions. There's no disputing it. This is from the Lord. And I think maybe the reason why it was face-to-face is because there's no way Joshua would have believed it unless God was standing in front of him. He would have chalked it up to a wacky dream or too much pizza the night before. Joshua had no doubt because he was looking at God. When God said, we're going to have this really cool parade, followed by a big marching band with the whole people cheering, Joshua, this is going to be the coolest thing. This was an all or nothing leadership moment. If it failed, Joshua was done as leader. You don't recover from that kind of thing. Sometimes when God tells you to do something, it doesn't make sense. 2019, we had the sense that we were supposed to do a dramatic upgrade on our online ministry. We completely replaced our equipment. We were dark. We weren't online. We couldn't be on TV for weeks. We built a whole new media room, an online room. The project took months longer than expected, was significantly over budget. You gave generously, but we all questioned if we'd done the right thing. And then 2020 happened. And in the first 4 weeks of the shutdown, our online audience grew from 30,000 a week to the week before Palm Sunday, we had over 125,000 people watching online that day. And you know what? We were ready. We had the capacity to do it because a year earlier we obeyed even though it didn't make sense. God knew what we needed far before we know. See, sometimes it's easy to look and say, well, why are we doing that now? I don't know either. But we trust that God knows. And He has a plan for us. We just want to hear His voice. Sometimes what God says doesn't make sense to you, but it makes perfect sense to God. God has an agenda. If it can only be God's plan, then it will only be for God's glory. So Joshua called the priests, and he said to them, remember, these are the same guys that got the instructions last time, stand in the middle of the river. This time he said, take up the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it. And he ordered the people, advance, march around the city with the armed guard going ahead of the Ark of the Lord. And when Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the Ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time, the trumpets were sounding, which let me just pause right there and say, these must have been good trumpet players. Because they're blowing their horns for a long time. Either that or they're bad players who are just wore out. But Joshua had commanded the people, do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices. In fact, don't say a word. until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout. And I'd love to know a little more about how Joshua told the people the plan. Can you imagine? Hey guys, this is going to be really cool. We're not going to fight. Instead, get this. You're going to love this. This is so fun. We're going to walk. We're going to walk all the way around the city. We're going to put the Ark of the Covenant in front. And then we're going to put some guys who play trumpets. And guys, you're going to play the trumpet forever. All right? You're just going to blow your horns. You're going to walk around. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to follow you. Now remember, this was before megaphones and sound systems. Joshua couldn't speak to all his men at once. Instead, word was passed from person to person all through that huge crowd. And by the time it got to the end, people had to be reacting the way you do to another stupid forwarded Facebook message. As word passed, guys were saying, we're doing what? Ask again. You must have heard wrong. We're not doing that. That's not how you fight. I've never fought a battle, but I know better than that. It would have been fun to listen into the conversations. Hey, Ben, what do you think about the parade thing? I know we've never fought, but what are we doing here? The Israelites obeyed the nonsensical instructions because this was the same group that had been at the Jordan River. The last time they put the Ark of the Covenant and the priests out front, the hands of God held back the waters of the mighty Jordan River. Leading with the Ark, with the presence of God, worked pretty well that time, so the people learned to trust in God. So they just obeyed. They didn't gripe. They didn't complain. They didn't ask for new shoes. As far as we know, no one said, we've never done it that way before. Or I read about that kind of army on the internet, and we better be careful. Well, when I was growing up, we have no record that someone said, that music is just too loud. And I don't like the song those trumpets are playing. I can't walk to that kind of music. If they want me to walk, I'm going to walk to the kind of stuff I heard when I was a kid. This is not walking music. As far as we know, nobody said, it's just too hot out here, I'm not going. Or it's too cold out here, depending on how the sanctuary feels right now. You might identify with different ones of those. Or God may have told you to do that, but God's leading me in another direction. I don't have time to do that. That doesn't seem very efficient. That doesn't make sense. None of that happened. There's no complaints. There was no second guessing of God's appointed leader. In fact, they didn't say anything. They're every leader's dream. Remember, Joshua just told them, don't say a word until the day I tell you to shout. It's really rather remarkable. They just started walking. They marched around the city following the trumpet section and the Ark of the Covenant. The only sound as they marched around Jericho was the sound of trumpets. No human voices at all. I'd love to know what the trumpet players were playing. We don't know. But they must have been in good shape because all around that city, they marched and they blew their trumpets. It's just this incredible people, tens of thousands of people quietly walking, following 7 guys playing instruments. It was the ultimate display of confidence. Come get us. We're right here, right outside the wall. We're so concerned about you that instead of invading, we're having a victory parade before the victory. So we had the Ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. And then the people returned to camp and spend the night there. Again, this part of the story is skipped, and I want to know what they said when they got back to their tent. Come on, think about it. I'm home, honey. What'd you do today? No, I just walked. What else? Nothing. I just walked. I didn't say a word. I walked. Fine. If you don't want to tell me, I've been here with the kids all day. I made your dinner. All I want is a little information, and all you'll say is I walked? Well, because that's what I did. I didn't talk. I didn't fight. I walked. So who'd you walk with? I don't really know. I just walked. Where'd you walk? Around. Fine. Don't tell me. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord, blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them. The rear guard followed the ark of the Lord while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the second day, they marched around the city once, and they returned to their camp. They did it for 6 days. Every day, same old drill. And the people had to wonder how long it was going to last. I'm off to work again, honey. What are you going to do today? Hey, we went through this yesterday. But I'm not exactly certain what we're doing today. I'm thinking we might walk. Again, how long are you going to walk? I'm just going to walk as long as Joshua tells me to walk. The Israelites were obedient without the information. How do we do on that? And did you notice? Joshua told them to march and be quiet. He didn't tell them about the 7th day. Every day, Joshua said, good morning. Guess what we're going to do today? We're going to do the parade thing again. And every day, the people obeyed. We're not like that. We want to know, if I do this, then what? God, if you will show me the payoff, if you show me what's at the end, I'll obey. Some of you missed God's calling and plan for your life because you refused to walk through the open door and trust God. You pray and plead for God to reveal his plan. God, what do you want to do with me? What do you want to do with my life? But when he opens the door for step 1, you're frustrated and don't take it. You're only willing to obey if God reveals the entire plan. You short-circuit the plan of God because you're only willing to obey if it makes sense, if it doesn't last too long, and if you can see the final outcome. I'm sorry, God, that just doesn't make sense to me. I don't see any possible way this could work. This can't be your plan. God wants to give you the city, but you refuse to take a walk. See, this story illustrates the difference between faith and trust. This was not a faith walk. They didn't even know what they were walking for. Joshua didn't tell them about the meeting with God. They hadn't been told they were going to take this city. For all they knew, they were just walking, but they trusted their leader and they trusted God, so they just walked. It's faith if God said, walk and pray that God will give us the city. It's trust when the people simply obeyed. And I wonder how often we miss the victory because we're unwilling to trust. You've heard me talk about I grew up in small churches. Dad was the song leader. And I remember Dad leading a simple chorus. It just went, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Now I understand that theology's a little off because sometimes obedience, you're not happy. Sometimes often obedience involves sacrifice, but still the core of that is good. You're never going to be happy if you won't trust and obey. You're never going to win a victory if you won't trust and obey. You say, Rod, that's how I win the battle? That's how I get my miracle? I thought I had to pray a certain prayer, or I thought I had to go to a meeting, or I thought I had to have the right person pray over me. I had to send $1 to the right televangelist. Trust and obey. Just trust and obey. And here's the neat part. It's a powerful principle. Trust builds expectation. Did your parents ever say this as a kid? Mine did. We're going somewhere. Come on, get in. It made me crazy. I want to know, where are we going? What are we going to do? I'm not going to tell you. Just trust me. I couldn't control myself wondering what was going to happen, but my parents had a long track record of being good to me. I couldn't wait to see where we were going and what we were going to do. It was exciting. That's what trust does. Trust builds expectation. When you follow God and you follow God's leader, anticipation builds. When you're on a walk of trust, at some point you begin to think, I wonder what God's going to do. I wonder how God's going to come through. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. I can't wait to see what's next on this journey of obedience and trust. I can't wait to see what he's going to do for me. I can't wait to see how he's going to use this. I can't wait to see his plan unfold. The longer you walk with God, the more you recognize his track record of goodness with you. You get to the point where you don't mind so much that you don't know exactly where you're going, because you're confident that wherever he leads you is going to be more amazing than anywhere you could have ever gotten by yourself. The Israelites had that attitude because they knew God's history. It wasn't long ago they built an altar after taking a long walk across a river that wasn't. That instruction didn't make sense either, but it worked. The Israelites knew that God blesses trust and obedience. They also knew that impatience and disobedience led to missing God's plan and God's promise. And so day after day, they got up in the morning, they tuned up the band, and they took a walk. They didn't do anything. They didn't say anything. They simply trusted and obeyed. What do you do when God's instructions don't seem to make sense? How do you handle it when life gives you a left turn that was unexpected? You trust and you obey. You say, but what's going to happen? When will my miracle come? When am I going to be healed? Why do I have to take this walk in the first place? The instruction is trust and obey. See, if you knew everything before it happened, you would be impatient and you would miss God's timing. Just think about the destinations you would have already missed if you'd known about the journey to get there. This is one of life's hardest lessons. Trust. Obey God and obey his instructions, even if you don't see the outcome. But I don't know what's going to happen. But this isn't how I planned it. When I mapped everything out, this wasn't on the map. Your heavenly Father knows what's best for you. You just have to wait on him.